This is Muhammad Faizuddin Ahmed, Assistant Teacher at Sapormaina High School, Post Office, Lakhipur. Being a teacher, I am very happy to conduct a radio class of Class 10 English at All India Radio Silchar. I have been instructed to discuss the lesson A Triumph of Surgery from Footprints Without Feet, a supplementary reader in English for Class 10. I hope you all will listen my teaching seriously. I will be glad if my today's teaching will make useful to you all. Now let us discuss the lesson A Triumph of Surgery by James Herriot. Dear students, A Triumph of Surgery minthonba wareng asi James Herriot ko ba English veterinary surgeon amani ibani. Triumph haiba wahi asigi artha di joy tauba haibani. Aduga surgery haiba asigi artha ani thokna haibi ai. Ahan bada wareng asigi narrator James Herriot na anaba huisingi laying bada sidina ba laying sang ani subada allopathy gi matung inna medical aid haibani. Wareng asigi matung inna artha animak adu chamnai. Wareng asida Mrs. Pamphe ko bi nupi amana triki ko ba hui ama yoklammi. Mahakna nungsiman badagi kahen pijabitak tauba amadi exercise tawhandabadagi narakhi. Madubu narrator James Herriot na surgery da laying duna fakivadu ayivana fajana fungdogli. Dear students, wareng asigi textual matik English amadi metur on the samlap na bhab sin handogli bani. Pugning chang na tasi loin na maru ay buhay singi artha su darkar ay bu ufam da handogli bani khang na bagi dama. Hauji ikoy na inrasi nga sige wareng A Triumph of Surgery by James Herriot. A Triumph of Surgery by James Herriot. Textual. I was really worried at the chinta toba about Tricky this time. I had pulled up haibadi lip my car when I saw him in the street with his mistress, and I was shocked at his appearance. Appearance I di my tongue mawung mato. He had become hugely fat, yamna chaunoiba, like a bloated haibadi pumkhatpa. So says haibadi gaigi tube the nongshit hanna chaukhatpagumba, with a leg at each corner. His eyes bloodshot haidi yam nangangba, and rheumi the watery discharge from nose or eyes. Mitragi natraga natundagi mahisin dhaba watery discharge soiba. Straight ahead, and his tongue lolled from his jaw. Loll ledi mariton mapanda tintokpa. Matang sibu aina tricky gi illness aina mintole. Here the narrator of the story, Mr. Herriot, who is the veterinary surgeon, was really worried about the dog. Its name was Tricky. He had stopped his car, seen the dog and his mistress, and shocked at his appearance. He had hugely fat. His eyes are red and watery. His tongue came out from its jaw. Wariyasi James Herriot ko ba veterinary surgeon have the sandakra amani ibni libani magna lambi da Tricky ko ba huyama mahapu yopiri bi mistress ka ubada mahak ki gari leblam mi amadi Tricky gi damak tamhak yam waram mi. Tricky gi masadu yam na kahen na noi chauram mi mamit ngangi mapitai amadi marai tondu machin dagi mapanda lekthram mi. Next textual. Mrs. Pamphe hastened to explain. He has so listless. Listless means lacking energy or enthusiasm. Pangal yaudaba, haraudaba. Mr. Herriot, he seemed to have no energy. I thought he must be suffering from malnutrition, lack of proper food. So I have been giving him some little extras between meals to build up some malt, cod liver oil, and a bowl of Horlicks at night to make him sleep. Nothing much really. And did you cut down on the sweet things as I told you? Oh, I did for a bit, but he seemed to be so weak, I had to relent. Relented tunghanba ay ngamkhidaba. He does love cream cakes and chocolates, so I cannot bear to refuse him. Masi matang asibuna aina tricky's mistress made tricky illan mingthole. Do maki gisti. The mistress of the dog was Mrs. Pumphrey. She told Mr. Harriet that the dog seemed to have no energy, so she gave extra malt, cod liver oil, and a bowl of Horlicks. She also gave some cream cakes and chocolates, despite Harriet's refusal. Chiki ko bahuya dugi mapudi Mrs. Pumphrey Magna Mr. Harriet Tairami. Huye sigi masada sakti yamata yaudavum mali maramaduna mahakna malt cod liver oil amadi Horlicks pijarami Mr. Harriet na athin batham labashu mahakna triki bu cream cake amadi chocolate chu pijarami. Textual part. I looked down again at the little dog. That was the trouble. Tricky's only fault was greed. He had never been known to refuse food. He would tackle a meal at any hour of the day or night. And I wondered about all things Mrs. Pumphrey had not mentioned. Are you giving him plenty of exercise? Well, he has little work with me, as you can see. But Hodkins, the gardener, has been down with lumbago khwangnaba. So there has been no ring throwing lately. I tried to sound severe. Now I really mean this. If you don't cut his food right down and give him more exercise, he is going to be really ill. You must harden your heart and keep him on a very strict diet. Mrs. Pumphrey wrung her hand. Oh, I will, Mr. Harriet. I am sure you are right, but it is so difficult, so very difficult. She set off, head down along the road, as if determined to put the new regime into practice immediately. Regime may be the sashon, Harriet's warning to Mrs. Pumphrey Harriet, look at the dog again. Its big trouble was it had some greedy. It did not refuse food. Harriet asked Mrs. Pumphrey if she had been giving the dog plenty of exercise. She said she had not. If she did not cut its food and gave it more physical exercise, it would really ill. She said that he was right, but it was difficult for her. Harriet na huya du buamuk yengle magi samasyado biyam chabani mahak kaidaw nung da chad dun laibangam de Mr. Harriet na tikibu exercise to hanbra hangbada Mrs. Pumphrey na tawdi haina khumlakki. Harriet na mahak onda warning to na haiki karigumba trikiji chaba thakpa chang na handraba diet tawdraba amadi exercise tawdraga di soidan naragani. Mrs. Pumphrey na hairami Mr. Harriet na haibadu chummi adubu madu thabuk oina pangthokpa yamna luna thoi. Next textual. I watch their progress with a growing concern. Tricky was tottering along in his little tweed coat. Tottering and a chinta toba. Tottering and walking weakly wana chatpa along in his little tweed coat, the woolen coat mathatuda. He had a whole wardrobe of these coats for the cold weather and a raincoat for the wet days. He struggled on drooping in his harness. Drooping at the falling the taba. Harness habna akan bathabukama shura matunda. I thought it wouldn't be long before I heard from Mrs. Pumphrey. The expected call came within a few days. Mrs. Pumphrey was distraught. distraught yamna waba, extremely worried. Tricky would eat nothing, refused even his favorite dishes, and besides, he had bouts of vomiting. Vomit over. He spent all his time lying on a rug, panting at the debating Nisha, Sorsi kan honba. Did not want to go for a walk, did not want to do anything. I had made my plans in advance. The only way was to get Tricky out of the house for a period. I suggested that he be hospitalized for about a fortnight to be kept under observation. The poor lady almost soon had become unconscious. She was sure he would pine and die if he did not see her every day. Pine one khangba. She was tricky to be in hospital and mingthole. Aduga maki guest na. Within next few days, Mrs. Pumphrey told Harriet that Tricky did not eat anything. It refused to eat even his favorite dishes. It spent all the day lying panting. The narrator had made his plans in advance. He suggested that Tricky should be hospitalized for about a fortnight. The lady almost became unconscious. She was sure it would die if it did not see her. Numit kharnegi tungda Mrs. Pumphrey na yamna ki na Tricky bu karisu chadre na phone toruklami. Magna magi pamjaba chinjak su chadre haina hairammi mag matam pumbada on thoiduna ta leirammi. Narrator na hanadagi hauna plan tawduna thamba Tricky bu numit tara mangani gi hospital da thamna ba suggest tawki. Mapu loiribi mapu Mrs. Pumphrey na yamna wakhal nungairamdi pangsing kirami magna khalli mapu udrabadi huidu shikhagani. Next text well. But I took a firm line. Tricky was very ill. This was the only way to save him. In fact, I thought it best to take him without delay, and followed by Mrs. Pumphrey's wailing at the weeping. I marched out to the car carrying the little dog wrapped in a blanket, wrapped at the yumba, pina jumba. The entire staff was roused and the maids rushed in and out, bringing his daybed, his nightbed, favorite cushions, toys and rubber rings, breakfast bowl, lunch bowl, super bowl. Realizing that my car would never hold all the stuff at the purchasing things, I started to drive away. As I moved off, Mrs. Pumphrey, with a despairing cry, threw an armful of the little coats through the window. I looked in the mirror before I turned the corner of the drive. Everybody was in tears. Out on the road, I glanced the yengba at the pathetic, at the pitiable, little Annabelle, gasping, deep breathing on the seat by my side. I patted the head and Tricky made a brave effort to wake at the mummy number. His tail, poor old lad, I said, you haven't a kick in you, but I think I know a cure for you. At surgery, the household dogs surged round me. Tricky looked down at the noisy pig with dull eyes, and when put down, lay motionless on the carpet. The other dogs, after sniffing round him for a few seconds, decided he was an uninteresting object and ignored him. Ignored the attention of the pidava. Masibu aina Tricky in hospital and mingtholaga magi jistu the scene. The narrator took a firm decision to save the dog Tricky. He took the dog in his car, Mrs. Pumphrey and her staff gave Tricky's belongings like their bed, night bed, cushion, toys, various bowls, coats, etc. At the hospital, Tricky looked down at other dogs. They sniffed around it and ignored it. Narrator na huyedubu safe to nabagidamatta huyedubu maki garida pudna chalami. Mrs. Premfemadi magi staff na huyedugi mathauta bo poche habadi nongthilda seasonable famong numidangda seasonable famong mompa makal mate tengot bowl coat sanna batu ina chimba pirami. Hospital da Tricky na atopa hui shindi yenglammi atopa hui mayam aduna su mahaki manam namki aduga mahapu ignore tauduna chatna kirame. Next text report. I made up a bed for him in a warm loose box next to the one where the other dogs slept. For 2 days I kept an eye on him, giving him no food but plenty of water. At the end of the second day he started to show some interesting in his surroundings, and on the third he began to whimper when he heard the dogs in the yard. Whimpered edi makhon kew 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 ton makhon torokpa. When I opened the door, Tricky trotted up and immediately engulfed by joy, the greyhound and his friend trotted out edi yang torokpa kanna chetpa engulfed na fajinba. Greyhound na a kind of dog. After rolling him over and thoroughly inspecting him, the dogs moved off down the garden. Tricky followed them, rolling slightly with his surplus fat. Later the day, I was present at the feeding time. I watched while Tristan slopped the food into the bowls. There was the usual headlong rush followed by the sounds of high-speed eating. Every dog knew that if he fell behind the others, he was liable to have some competition for the last part of his meal. When they had finished, Tricky took a walk round the shining bowls, licking ID, testing with tongue slap, casually inside one or two of them. Next day, an extra bowl was put out for him, and I was pleased to see him just playing his way towards it. Just pulling and pushing. Masibu aina Tricky's treatment and a heading taller. Title Tolaga Magi Gisto Sumina Oini. The narrator kept an eye on Tricky for 2 days. He gave it plenty of water, but no food. On the third day, it started whimpering on seeing other dogs. It followed them down the garden. Later that day, other dogs had had their food. Tricky walked around the bowls and licked them. He was given some food. Narrator na numit nini Tricky bu amna chection yang lammi. Magna Tricky bu isin pitak lammi. Aduga atop pot amata pijaram de. Numit humni shuba numitta mag atop huising bu uraga khongba horak lammi. Makhoyi matungina baganda koirammi. Atop huising na machinjak chana khabada Tricky makoina chakiba bowl adu lek lammi. Mahakunda su machinjak kharap pijarammi. From then on, his progress was rapid. He had no medicinal treatment of any kind, but all day he ran about with dogs, joining in their friendly scrimmages. He discovered the joys of being bowled over, defeat tramped on, and squashed every few minutes. Makhongna chappa adedi chapna sanarmi mitunda. He became an accepted member of the gang ID group to the an unlikely silky little object among the Segi crew. Segi ID full of hair. Masamna Tanba crew the workers group. fighting like a tiger for his share at mealtimes and hunting rats in the old henhouse at night. He had never had such a time in his life. All the while, Mrs. Pumphrey hovered anxiously in the background, ringing a dozen times a day for the latest bulletins. Hovered haibadi move over aduga bulletin nongmagi kari kari oire abduma khangna leirami. I dodged the questions about whether his cushions were being turned regularly or his correct coat worn according to the weather, but I was able to tell her that the little fellow was out of danger and convalescing rapidly. Convalescing haibadi anabadagi farakpa rapidly de yang masiboina heading the tricky shows improvement and thamaga madugi gista sumaina tricky started to show progress. It was given no medical treatment. It ran about with other dogs all the day. It discovered the joy of being with other dogs. Meanwhile, Mrs. Pumphrey continued ringing regularly. She asked various questions about Tricky, but the narrator told her that the dog was out of danger and convalescing rapidly. Tricky fagalami mahakunda karigumba hidak amatta sijinaramde mag atopa hui mayam ga kuchen chienduna sanajaba yamna pamjarammi harawjarammi. Maraksida Mrs. Pumphreyna toina phone toroklammi mahat Tricky gi maramda wahang kayamuk hagnaki maduda narrator na mahak monda hui edu out of danger ni amadi yamna faglagi hai na khumlammi. The word convalescing seemed to do something to Mrs. Pumphrey. She started to bring round fresh eggs, 2 dozen at a time, to build up Tricky's strength for a happy period. My partners and I had 2 eggs each for breakfast, but when the bottles of wine began to arrive, the real possibilities of the situation began to dawn on the household. Down on how they became known, Ma'am Khangnaba. It was to enrich Tricky's blood. Lunch became a ceremonial occasion with 2 glasses of wine before and several during the meal. We could hardly believe it when the brandy came to put a final edge on Tricky's constitution at the Haksangi Shawang physique. For a few nights, the fine spirit was rolled around, inhaled, and reverently drunk. Inhaled Chingshinba, reverently had no with respect. They were days of deep content. Here content meaning satisfaction, starting well with the extra egg in the morning, improved and sustained by the midday wine, and finishing luxuriously round the fire with the brandy, sustained and keep alive. It was a temptation to keep Tricky on as a permanent guest, temptation of the attraction to her. But I knew Mrs. Pumphrey was suffering, and after a fortnight felt compelled to phone and tell her that the little dog had recovered the Fare have got all right and was awaiting collection. Collection being taken back. Masibuena, when Tricky becomes all right and Tolaga Madugi gist nasuni, Mrs. Pumphrey started to bring round the fresh eggs to build up Tricky's strength. The narrator began giving Tricky wine before and during the meal. The dog began to drink brandy also. Tricky now had one extra egg in the morning. It had wine at noon and brandy in the evening. After a fortnight, the narrator rang her up, saying the dog was all right. Mrs. Pumphrey Tricky gi pangal shakti hengatna ba pijana na ba yerum puraklami narrator na Tricky gi chabagi mamang da amadi charingai da ju pithaklam pahaurammi. Tricky na brandy su thakle. Mahakna Tricky bu ayukta jerum amamam su pijaramle. Tricky bu nongtilda wine amadi sandada brandy pithaklami. Numit taraga mangani gi matunda narrator na phone da Mrs. Pumphrey da hui fare laura bajarani haina hairammi. Within minutes, about 30 feet of gleaming at the shining black metal drew up outside the surgery. The chauffeur is the private driver, opened the door, and I could just make out the figure of Mrs. Pumphrey almost lost in the interior. Her hands were tightly clasped in front of her. Her lips trembled Nick. Oh, Mr. Harriet, do tell me the truth. Is he really better? Yes, he's fine. There is no need for you to get out of the car. I'll go and fetch him. I walked through the house into the garden. A mass a large number of dogs was hurtling at the khong loud round and round the lawn, and in their midst, ears flapping, tail waving was the little golden figure of Tricky. Flapping had the moving in 2 weeks, he had been transformed by the chains into a late, L-I-T-H-E, late the flexible hard-muscled animal. He was keeping up well with the pack at the group nisishu, stretching out at the sandopa, stretching at the expantoba in great bounds jump chumba, his chest almost brushing the ground. I carried him back along the passage to the front of the house. The chauffeur was still holding the car door open, and when Tricky saw his mistress, he took off from my arms in tremendous at the great yam chong leap chumba, jumped over and sailed the taroba, ran off into Mrs. Pumphrey's lap. She gave a startled at the amazed oh, and then had to defend herself as he swung the climbed Kaba over her, licking her face and barking, licking at the leg, barking at Khomba. Masigi partsibuna in a Mrs. Pumphrey comes to take Tricky home. And a Mintolaga, Jista Sumeno Waitani. Mrs. Pumphrey arrived at the narrator in a big car. She asked him If the dog was better, the narrator told her that the dog was fine. He would bring it to her. When Tricky saw her, it ran into Mrs. Pumphrey's lap. It began licking her face and barking. Mrs. Pumphrey achoba karama pudna narrator gi yumda laklammi. Mahakna hui adu farabra haina narrator da hanglammi. Narrator na hui adu fare haina khumlakhi. Tricky bu Mrs. Pumphrey gi manakta narrator na puraklammi. Tricky na mahapu uba maktada mahaki matam baksa yamna harauna chongkhatlamme. Mahapu lekchiki yamna harauna khongjaki. During the textual part, during the excitement, I helped the chauffeur to bring out the beds, toys, cushions, coats, bowls, none of which had been used. As the car moved away, Mrs. Pumphrey leaned at the cheap out of the window, tears shone in her eyes, her lips trembled. "Oh, Mr. Harriet," she cried, "how can I ever thank you? This is a triumph of surgery, triumph of the victory joitoba. Masi participant Tricky's cure, a triumph of surgery and mintolaga, magi gistuna." The narrator helped the driver to bring out Tricky's various things. These were Tricky's bed, cushions, toys, coats, bowls, etc. They had not been used. As the car moved away, Mrs. Pumphrey leaned out of the window. Tears shone in her eyes. Her lips trembled. She told the narrator that it was a triumph of surgery. Narrator na Tricky gi pot chasing lothopada driver bu mateng panglammi. Pot singdudi Tricky na sijinabu famong mompak sanna ba toysing kod na chingba tasingadi pot singdu amata sijinakide gari thauba horobada Mrs. Pumphrey gari gi damak makok lithol lakhirammi amadi milu dagi pirang sintha khonthang nikna narrator da haikirammi machine surgery gi joy ne. Dear students, hujik nainasi ba wareng asige main character de Mrs. Pumphrey, Mr. Harriet amadi Tricky ko buhuya duni. Wari asi James Harriet na ibani, mahagna libani, mahagna lambida Mrs. Pumphrey na Tricky bu puduna chatpa matamda lambida mahaki yamna chawba noi pen badu henjan badu ubada mahagna yamna wa nungairamde aduna mahak ki mistress to the Tricky ki mistress to the sumaina tauragadi yamna chawra di narak lagani na haibani Mrs. Pumphrey da mahak kari pija obharo na pija nu haiba diet togada me haiba da diet togadi mahak na ithokte mahak yam nungsina mahak thamjaba Tricky bu mahak na pija yam na pi hen thoidok hendok na pija pithak torami mahak shon thakini na adubu mahak na hen na pija na maram moidna mahak yam noi pen na maram moidna matam khani gi matung da mahak na James Harriet ta phone to na hairam me Tricky kari ma chadre mahak na yam na pam jaba haibabu mahak na chaba pam jaba chinjak phoba charaktre haina harak labada mahak na Harriet Mrs. Pumphrey gi yum de chatna Tricky bu loro puraklami Tricky bu purak padmatam da Mrs. Pumphrey yam na nungairam de mahak na Tricky bu purak pamatam da Mrs. Pumphrey madi maki staff ki miyoi singna hui adugi mathau taba poche mompak na chingba hipna na ba chana na ba bowl sing jam na piram me adubu kariya amata sijin na kiram de. On the other hand, magna ising tamak pitaga medicine use to the namak pun numit nini yam chekshin yang lamme adugi matung da mak khar mayam hui ategi mo matung ilak labada mahak pu humni sudun mitagi mahak on the karapi machinjak karapi jaba horami matamadu matam Mrs. Pamphena toina phone tawduna hanglak kirami triki gi masaduk fagalabra fagatribra karam tawina Mrs. Pamphena hanglak labada Mr. Harriet na khummi mahak khar farakle adubu yang na faragani haina mahak yang na faragani haina khumlak labada Mr. Harriet ki wafum dutta bada Mrs. Pamphena naruraba hui triki bu pitchen number gidamakta wine brandy gerum na chimba magi mathau ta pot ya chinjak jam na pirammi adubu Mr. Harriet na puno pijade ayukta gerum mama karigum brandy amade ju khaji pisak to horammi at last moment fare haina mahakna tara mangani gi matunda Mrs. Pampheda Harriet the narrator masi ayi bana phone tawduna hairami hui adu fare tarabada Mrs. Pamphena choba karama puduna laklami kardu puduna laklaga mak thajaramdi amuk hanna Mr. Harriet ta hanglami tasien hui adu farabra narrator na fare haina khumki awdagi triki bu mahakna mayam hui mayam gi maraktagi puma maki madam mistress ki manakta pudun laki hui aduna mahakpu yukpi bi Mrs. Pampheba ubamaktada Mr. Harriet ki makuttagi chung taduna Mrs. Pampheba tampakta kaki amadi mapu lechaki harauna khongjaki masi da Mrs. Pamphena maki hui yamna chaubna waru raba kari machakpanga modraba adubu Mr. Harriet na maki surgery da puraga jamna haisingna makbu lying padubu a triumph of surgery na joy ni ana haisi. Write the characters of Pampheba and Mr. Harriet. Hojit Mrs. Pampheba character gi matang da kari haini hagadi Mrs. Pampheba was a rich lady. This is clear how she kept tricky. She had a chauffeur-driven long black car. She spent a lot of money on delicacies for Tricky. She gave Tricky a rich diet. She gave him eggs, malt, cod liver oil, and a bowl of Horlicks. She had many servants, maids, and nurses in her household. She has all things of comfort for Tricky. These were night bed, favorite cushions, toys, rubber rings, etc., etc. Then she sent fresh eggs, wine, whiskey, brandy, etc. This shows that Mrs. Pampheba was a rich lady. Aduga character of Mr. Harriet. Mr. Harriet is the narrator of this lesson. He is a veterinary surgeon and very practical man. He is also tactful and has a lot of common sense. He is kind-hearted and jovial kind of fellow. He at once understands Tricky's illness. He wants to keep Tricky on a permanent basis. It is his selfishness because he gets supplies from Mrs. Pampheba for Tricky. He consumes this, but it is not a mean quality. These are the characters of Mrs. Pampheba and Mr. Harriet. Now, the question is, how Mr. Harriet cured Tricky's illness? If the question arises, the answer will be, Mr. Harriet took Tricky to his surgery. There he made up a bed for him. For 2 days he kept an eye on it. He gave it no food but plenty of water. On 3rd day, Tricky showed some interest in its surroundings. It started searching some food. Mr. Harriet also gave brandy to Tricky. Its diet was an extra egg in the morning, wine at noon, and brandy in the evening. These things had a great effect on Tricky. Then the company of dogs also proved much important in Tricky's improvement. Very soon it became alright. Next question. Describe Mrs. Pumphrey's love and worry for Tricky, or how is Mrs. Pumphrey responsible for Tricky's ailment? In fact, Mrs. Pumphrey has a great love for Tricky, her dog. She doesn't treat it as an animal. She treats it as a human being, like her own child. This fact is seen in Tricky's food. Tricky has been given every sort of luxury, but no work. It has become a very fat. The result is that Tricky falls ill because it has no physical exercise. Mrs. Pumphrey's worries are great. She calls Mr. Harriet, a veterinary surgeon. He takes Tricky to his surgery, but he regulates its diet. He gives it physical exercise. Tricky gets all right again. Now the question is, compare and contrast Tricky in the beginning and in the end of the story. Answer will be, we see two sides of Tricky. In the beginning, Tricky was hugely fat. It was bloated like a sausage. Its tongue lolled from its jaws. It was lazy and looked so. It was greedy and ate food the whole day, but it did not exercise. So this worried Mrs. Pumphrey greatly. She telephoned Mr. Harriet, the author. He took it to his surgery. At the surgery, Mr. Harriet gave Tricky a lot of water and no food. On the third day, it started barking at other dogs. Other dogs befriended it. In 2 weeks, it got well. It looked again a little golden figure. Now next question is, how do you know that Mrs. Pumphrey was a rich lady? Answer will be, Mrs. Pumphrey was a rich lady. This is clear how she kept Tricky. She had a chauffeur-driven long black car. She spent a lot of money on delicacies for Tricky. She gave Tricky a rich diet. She gave it eggs, malt, cod liver oil, and a bowl of Horlicks. She had many servants, maids, and nurses in her household. She had all things of comfort for Tricky. Then she sent many delicacies. These were fresh eggs, wines, whiskey, etc. This shows that Mrs. Pumphrey was a rich lady. Next question is, comment on aptness Chanaba of the title of the story, A Triumph of Surgery. Triumph of Surgery se Chanaba Answer, surgery is the hospital for sick dogs. It also referred to medical aid in allopathy. The title refers both these meanings. Tricky is the dear dog of Mrs. Pumphrey. It falls ill. Mrs. Pumphrey gets sad at its illness. She calls the author, who is also a veterinary surgeon. He takes Tricky to the surgery. He regulates Tricky's diet. He makes it run with other dogs. But it was all right after treatment at surgery. So, the importance of the surgery is clear. The chapter is all about this. So, it is appropriate title. The title is the main idea of the story.